You're listening to 102.9 WFPRLP, Franklin Public Radio.
Look at that.
Nice job, Chris.
All right, Steve. Thank you, Steve and Chris.
You guys are heroes.
One more, Chris.
Oh, it says we're muted.
Just give me the high sign, Chris, when you're ready. We're good? Wow. Okay, we'll come back to order, and I'll welcome people who are watching on TV now. And for the Zoom people, I apologize, we had a little technical difficulty here, but we are back on Zoom, live, not Memorex, and there's probably 5 people in here that know what Memorex was. Sorry about that.
He doesn't know.
I know.
Went right over. Jamie, take it away.
You didn't know?
We're not doing audio cassettes anymore. No. So just a quick, for the folks at home, November 8th will be the Finance Committee FY24 budget review. November 15th will be the Town Council FY24 budget review. And then thanks to Rob, it's Tuesday, November 21st. So it was a day off. It's Tuesday, November 21st will be the tax rate hearing. And then we pivot to FY25 budget development. As I was just saying, we will be seeing a downgrade in revenue projections for the year in new growth by $270,000. Local receipts through Q1 just eked over the 25%, like on the last day of September. And just for people that don't know what those are, you talk about meals taxes, ambulance receipts, generally fees for service, building permits. Generally speaking, most of the revenues are okay. A couple of causes for concern. Our building fees for the building department are down and not meeting projections yet, as well as the hotel tax. Hotel tax so far has met just about that projection, but that's through September 30th, and as everybody knows, we're uncertain right now what the impact will be. I'm waiting to the last possible minute I can, but there is the potential that due to the shelter, without the state making its commitment to the 6% local option hotel tax, and that's statewide. This isn't something they're just doing at Franklin. We can't really, I think, in good spirit, put revenue projection in the budget that we can't back up and commit somewhere. So that is a concern of mine. As I think everybody would expect, we've all been on the phone with Representative Roy, Senator Roush. We're starting to see letters from the towns of Foxborough and a variety of other communities really pushing the governor, the administration, and the state on this. I'm sure it's a very complicated legal issue. But it just doesn't feel fair or correct when towns have passed their budgets to then say we're not going to honor that. At some point, I have to believe that the legislature and the governor will figure this out. But as of right now, I just have to give everybody, the heads up. We could be losing a pretty significant amount of revenue. Granted, it's 1 out of 4 hotels that we have in town, so it's not like it's the whole pool of revenue, but Again, not really a trend. There is another piece of that, which many communities are speaking to, that if the state can't commit to that, people also have to realize that if you have 80% occupancy at that hotel, those folks in that hotel are coming for homecoming weekends, they're going to concerts, they're going to hockey leagues, and then they eat out. And so there is another effect on meals tax and other local option taxes and revenue sources that are of concern that Amy and I have heard from a lot of our colleagues statewide, bring this issue up to the legislature as well. And so we'll have to wait and see on those issues. So, and finally, state aid, a very de minimis change from the final approved budget. We will put in those final numbers, but for all intents and purposes, state aid stayed flat throughout almost the entire budget process. And when people say to me, well, why is Chapter 70 going up? People can't just look at that one bullet point press release from somebody, because the charter school assessment on the other side is then taking away a lot of that revenue and actually putting it more into the negative. So, as I've said at many meetings, but just for the folks that are at home, we don't analyze state aid revenues just on Chapter 70. So we don't just talk about the positive piece. There's a series of dozens of formulas in state law and in the budget that come out on what's called the cherry sheet. And we use the cherry sheet as our baseline. That's what every municipality does. So this isn't something that's different. I will say I don't have before you tonight, I'm not going to get into how to patch that budget gap. I do want to relay that I do believe that we will be able to patch this budget gap through some creative ways that will not have an impact on services. For example, just to highlight one, the Tri-County assessment for the school due to a smaller enrollment from Franklin will decrease. So the budget number that we had in the budget was well higher than what we actually have to pay. And it's about $100,000. So it's a fairly good chunk of money. We're going to be looking at the healthcare and the benefits line item, tightening up that based on the actual benefits that people are taking. And so we're going to go in and crunch a number, sharpen the pencils up a little bit, and go in there and we'll present a balanced budget revision to the Finance Committee on the 8th, and then the Council on the 15th. And so that's basically my update as of right now on the high-level points. I know it's not good news, but we have predicted some of this coming. It's been in the materials for years. And I think when we enter into FY25, I think the harder pill to swallow is going to be the fact that we can obviously not count on new growth as robust of a revenue source as we have to get us through the pandemic years, because all of those projects that came online during the lockdown years, they were already financed, they were permitted, there were crews on site, materials were ordered. So those projects just moved through, came online, and helped the new growth. That's for the private residential homeowner as much as a commercial body. Obviously, in today's marketplace, it's shifted quite dramatically, right? So, happy to answer any questions. I know tonight, Mr. Chairman, the school superintendent, school business administrator here, I think they have a few slides on their own budget update, at which they presented, I think, to a school committee subcommittee recently. But before you move over there, I'm happy to entertain any quick questions if folks have them.
Certainly. Thank you, Jamie. Any questions on the revenue piece from, for Jamie, from the council or group? And how about from the council chambers audience? Any questions out there in Zoom land? I can see again, so I don't see, can't see all of them, but I can see a bunch. I don't see, do you see anything, Amy?
I do not.
Nope.
Jim? Okay. All right. The next piece, I'll go to Superintendent Jaguar, who has a little bit of an update for us, as we promised in our August meeting. Lucas, please.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you. We will let this warm up, but as we warm up, we left last meeting, I think the last meeting was August 25th?
August 2nd.
22nd.
22nd?
Second.
Second was?
Yeah, it was early August.
Wow, time's flying. You're right, it was, because we had the administrative retreat that day. Okay, so we're here tonight to provide an update on where we left off last meeting. As Jamie mentioned during last meeting, this work is detailed, it's comprehensive, it's in play with many other things, but what we wanted to do was provide information that we heard last meeting, and then some of the questions that I know are out there, and we thought that by sharing some information tonight, getting some questions, we can continue to build on the story and build on the budget of where we're at, where we aspire to be, and what it entails, and hopefully answer detailed questions on kind of how our budgets are kind of built and made. So here's just a brief overview. There's basically 7 key points we hope to cover today. One is a very brief review of FY23 to just provide some brief context. Look at where we are today with our budget. Look at current services, if they were to be funded through, and just project out for next year, FY25. We then put a model together that just looks at a scenario if you were funded at the state average, which is not, this is not a budget request evening. This is more about beginning this conversation and having an engaged conversation now, but I wanted to share that. Look at revenues over time from the school perspective, and look at a brief look at where we aspire to be as a district. And then there's a historical perspective, which we won't go through every piece, but we will share this document to try to provide. This was put together last year, and it just includes the reductions, reallocations, expansions, and different things that have occurred throughout the district over the past 2 decades. And then we'll open it up to any questions as we continue the conversation. So just looking back at FY23, you'll see we've broken it down into the 3 main areas in which we look at funding sources. As you've heard from Jamie from school meetings, you have a town appropriation, you have Chapter 70 state aid. We have our revolving accounts, which encompass fees, and then we have grant funding, which occurred. So in FY23, we've broken this down. Some of these numbers may look familiar to those paying attention and looked in the past around the 70 million approximately with revenue to schools. They're looking at the 5.5 million in revolving, and then grant funding at 2.1. So this is just a breakdown. I'm not going to belabor this particular slide. It's looking back. As we move into FY24, you may recognize the number, the 1.4 million. If we look at how we finalized the budget through your approval and the school committee's approval in June, we landed at the 42 plus the 29 million, which is the Chapter 70 state aid, which is a familiar number to those who have paid attention to that number. And then we looked at the fees, what we had in revolving, along with our grant funding, and that brings us to that total. I'll pause for questions once we get through the first few slides, and then we can open it up, okay? All right. So I'll let Dr. Dutch chime in on this, but basically we tried to model out if we were to fund and service what we currently have in place at Franklin Public Schools. So that's not adding anything that's been reduced previously, but just to carry forward and continue to conduct business. This is the amount that we would need to fund based on everything that we have today.
And we've included in there some assumptions. We know what the salaries will be for next year, assuming everybody stays. The supplies and materials, we put in a 2.5% increase. Health insurance, we're estimating a 6% increase. I don't know if that's accurate.
It is.
Jamie.
It's close, but
in
it's a
the
good model
ballpark.
number. Yeah.
And then our out-of-district tuitions, we've been notified by OSD that the increase would be 4.69% this year, which is fortunately less than 14% last year, but it's still a fairly significant number. So when you tally all that up, it brings us to, if we're level serviced, 81 million plus some change.
Do you want to talk through this one? This
Sure.
is the model.
So we looked at the per pupil state average, which is $19,536, and that's for FY22. And then we looked at our FY24 per pupil average, which was $15,373. and that brings you to the 71,989. If we were going to fund the district at the state average per pupil expenditure, you can see we're almost $20 million behind for the number of students that we have. And again, to restate what the superintendent said, not an ask, we don't expect to be at that number, but just to give you an idea of how far behind we are from the state average in total. And this is the same information over a longer period of time, with the difference per pupil between the state average and Franklin. And I guess what I would draw your attention to is that that number continues to increase, with one year where there was a couple of years where there was a slight dip in 19 and 20. But you look at the difference in FY '22 and it's almost $3,000. So hopefully we can stem that tide as we move forward. So I'd like to just, this really gives you all 3 years in one place. And again, it is looking at revenue, and we've made a prediction for FY '25 based on the town administrator's presentation back on August 2nd. So we are assuming a 2.5% increase, and we're hopeful that's a minimum. And that 2.5% is on the total 71,989,601, because that's where the appropriation comes from, but we still break it out by town appropriation in Chapter 78. We can assume that we'll continue to get $30 per pupil at 4,600 students, plus or minus. That gives us about $150,000 more in state aid. Revolving, you can see there's a decrease in FY '25 from what we're contributing this year from our revolving accounts. That's $7 million that's being contributed this year. We'll deplete those accounts to mostly zero. So the revenue you're seeing against the budget for next year is all of the revenue that we anticipate to bring in this year. So we're not even looking at putting any away for a rainy day, so that we can get to that bottom line number that would end up matching what you're seeing as a level service budget. Grants, we've seen a 5% decrease over time each year. We're going to be aggressive about going after private grants and competitive grants. So hopefully that number will be a little bit higher. So you can see we're at $81,327,000 for all of our revenue. If you think back to the previous slide of level service, we were at $81,100,000 and something thousand. So pretty close. Lucas, back to you.
Okay. Just moving forward, this is not a comprehensive list, but this is just to continue this conversation and discussion around having a school system. And I've talked before about advocating for schools and wanting to provide the best possible program and experience that we can for our students and our families and for our community and our town. So if we were, this is just a model to show if we were to reinstate our middle school clubs, our late buses, increase the supply allocations. We reduced our school supply budgets across all 10 schools by 20%, 25% and 20% at the high school. So this is just based on a 5% increase back of reinstatement. Bringing back curriculum committees that exist in different curriculum areas, such as your science, math, English, and history, social studies. If we were to return a portion of our digital learning integrationists, just as an example, our library media specialists, which we reduced at the high school level, if we were to bring back a high school and a secondary/elementary complex position, we reduced a Spanish teacher to make that whole at the middle level. So this is just an example of if we reinstated cuts that were made in recent years, And this also incorporates into ESSER funding. As you know, ESSER funding is going to run out. What we have out in ESSER funding is the position, some counseling, FTE, interventionists at the elementary level, and a DEI coordinator position are in there. So I was just at a meeting today with many superintendents in the state, and everyone's trying to figure out how they can sustain the funding for some of those positions that were included and by bringing them into their budgets, and it's certainly a balancing act across the state. With new initiatives, some of these may look familiar if you've been around long enough that they may have been cut so long ago. We didn't want to call it a reinstatement because they've been gone for maybe many years. This is not a comprehensive list, but this is based on conversations with our administration over time through listening tours they did at each of the schools last year, and then in addition to some of the positions along the way. So you'll see in here an investment in some of the curriculum materials across levels, some positions. It looks, you'll see some music included, strings at the elementary level came up. Some of our in-district programming, adding additional teachers to sustain, to have the support we need in some of those classes. And then some of these were part of the budget presentation that we gave in the spring, but did not make it to the final list because of the funding. But through the iteration through April and May and June, these were things that were on the original proposal, but then had come off along the way. So these are some of the positions that are on there. When we look at the I can stop there. I can take questions, of course.
Just to kind of draw your attention to the number, reinstating those positions that were cut would be about 2.4 million, and then new initiatives is another 2.1 million. So you're looking at about $4.5 million to be where we would want to be as a district, just so that you have a target.
This does not include, because we needed to do a deeper dive, just looking at special education. It does account for some of the assumptions that we made with the out of district. You saw that increase of 4.69%, but it doesn't account for the special education needs and services that we would need in school. That's more detailed, and we certainly didn't want to spitball on a number. So this is not necessarily a comprehensive list, but we felt like we wanted to come back to the table today to just give a sense of some of the positions that have either been removed over time or are needed based on what we've learned. And then I won't go through all these, but we added this as part of the document. It's just to go through where did some of those initiatives that would be reinstated or added come from. And this is a comprehensive list that we've put together and we've included in here. I know it's been in previous budget presentations as well, but it brings you back over the last 20 years to give you a sense. And we can stop there and take any questions.
Thanks, Lucas. Before I go to the committee for questions, there were just a few things that came to me at our last meeting and since our last meeting that I want to make sure that we quickly talk about. And one of the things I think that's important to highlight is, and you said so in your presentation, is because everybody asks, what's the status of the revolving accounts? And what's the status going to be at the end of the year? And you answered that you're basically bringing your revolving accounts down to zero by the end of the year?
Yes.
Yes.
So that when we start next year, you'll be starting from basically zero. Is that correct?
We'll be at zero. Well, we're spending what we had available. We're now bringing in additional revenue, which is what we're using to fund in the future.
And that's what that
That's what that $5.5 million.
the 5.5 is what you expect to have for
At the
next
end
year.
of this fiscal year for next year.
Okay. Second piece is, one of the things we talked about was looking at a 5-year plan, not only from the municipal part of our government, but from the school part of the government. And I don't want people to get confused that this is a 5-year plan. This is just the beginning of that. And I guess just so people understand an approximate time frame that you think it will be, and I know we're coming to an election, and seats are gonna change, and they will, of course, be part of making those decisions as to what a 5-year plan looks like. So I guess, just so that everybody's sitting here this evening, everybody on Zoom, everybody watching on TV, has an idea when we will be looking at both the municipal 5-year plan and the school 5-year plan.
I would say this, it's not going to be tomorrow. I think
I
we do
was
need
pretty
time.
sure that was the case.
I appreciate you mentioning some of the changes that we'll have in leadership
Yeah.
across the board. And I think we need to make sure that we're working together and also have our school committee folks in place. We also, I think, it's like side by side, we need to develop our budget for FY '25.
Right.
And then also have a longer range plan. We had a little more detail that wasn't really appropriate to share tonight, but to look at, for example, when you look at curriculum, you don't buy all the curriculum in 1 year. You have to think about what's the capacity of our teachers to implement curriculum, to be trained. All of these things get staged out, and I think we need to prepare that at the same time. And we need to also involve not only our new school committee, our returning, but also our stakeholders and try to get a better and a clearer picture. So those numbers are not, these are not numbers that we're delivering today, but not delivering some information that gives you a sense of kind of where our minds are at, what didn't feel like it was appropriate to do. So I would say we'll start our budget development process. We've already begun to get our ducks lined up on that. We'll continue in concert. I know that the town, and Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, I know that you work with department heads to get, you have a deadline for a timeline. Ours is a little staggered off of that. So I would imagine that we would need to get through the fall and into the winter, I think, to really get to a place where we have a solid number with a clear plan for what the return on investment on the budget and what those increases would look like and why.
So I guess, just to identify, February, March, April, somewhere in that time frame, we should be able to look at 5 years out from both parts of our government.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yeah, I mean, I think the forecast that was put out on August 2nd is a forecast.
I understand.
And that's, I think part of the trouble here is that the expense line items like the schools are small unless you're Brutus or DPW or facilities. So what people saw on August 2nd, unless some miraculous factor comes in and changes it, that model is what you're looking at.
From the municipal part.
Yeah, I mean, if, and the 2.5% in there that I put as a placeholder for the school district that's been the percentage for years.
Right, but in order to look at the future,
Sure.
we need to be looking out not at what we can fund in '25, but
Beyond,
what we
yeah.
can continue to fund in '25, '26, '27, '28.
Sure.
And that's the goal that I'm
That's the
trying to
goal.
get us to, so that we understand what the need is for the community, and we can get that information to the community, so they understand what the need really and truly is. Okay, I've said enough on that piece. My last piece that I wanted to make sure I got out there. I know the state's committed to between $17,000 and $18,000 a student for reimbursement for the schools, school-aged kids from the migrant families, which is great news. Do you have any idea, and I'm asking this for the audience to understand, Do you have any idea when you're gonna see that money?
It's a good question. It came up last night at our school committee meeting as well. So we've been told that they're quarterly installments. I do not have any, I have not received any clear information on the due date or the deadline for that to occur. But what we do know is it's based on the number of students that you have enrolled in your district. They've put and communicated forth a formula to which you just mentioned, Tom. It's basically the number of students you have enrolled per day in your district, along with a head count, basically, for each student that's enrolled. So, as I said at school committee last night, we have approximately 40 students currently, and we don't have any definitive time, but what has been shared and expressed at the Tri-County Superintendents, not to be confused with the school Tri-County, it's the name of our regional superintendent group. We had a representative from the Department of Ed there who said that these are planned to be in quarterly installments. So as soon as I know more information, I'll certainly share that, but I don't have a definitive date.
Understood, and I knew the answer, but
Okay.
I think it's important for the audience to understand that the information we're getting from the state isn't coming fast and furious. It's coming slowly. The other piece of that, and this is just a personal question or concern. We figure our per pupil expenditure at roughly that number, which is what they're saying, between 17 and 18. Does the money that the state is saying they're going to give the communities, does that account for interpreters or specialists that are needed to help educate these students? And then my really foul ball is, what if there is one of these students that is a special needs student? Having been involved in the schools many years ago, I know that number can be astronomical. And the last I heard from the state is they put a number of $1,000 aside to handle any special requests, which isn't nearly enough. And I guess, what do we do if that happens?
So I can just start with just a broad answer, and then I can drill down to some of the specific questions you have. I've said this too, and I stand by this. You know, we have a responsibility as a school district to educate the students that live within the boundaries of our town, right? Regardless of their circumstances or background, and that's what we do. And we have some really high-quality educators who are out there doing the good work. The money that we talked about, the state reimbursing, is meant to go to the direct benefit of educating students and what it takes to educate them. So the services, supports are what that is intended to go towards for the reimbursement piece. That said, we've thoughtfully placed students where it made the most sense within the district. Transportation, challenging, but we've found ways to make that work, to get kids to school, educate them, send them home. I can't answer the specific question about special education placement, but I know that the students who are enrolled, whether they're from the hotel or from a house or a rental within town, they're all, we approach the work to support students the same way, regardless of that. So I don't have an answer on the special education piece. It's a good question. But certainly I know that we consider these students, along with all students, as Franklin High School students or Franklin Public School students who are attending, and that's how we've just approached the work.
Okay, I'll take some time off. Please.
I had just some questions around the math. Coming from the Finance Committee, obviously that's where my brain goes first. So the budget for FY23 was $77,986. It increased just over $3 million for FY24 to $81,139. And that included cuts. So there was baseline support plus, well, because not baseline, you cut off approximately $2 million, which was a whole bunch of the things that you went through, the middle schools, the clubs, the late buses. I'm surprised that FY '25 essentially is flat, 81, like, I don't understand how you, to be level from FY '23 to FY '24, you would have needed $5 million, and then, like, additional, but then only from '24 to '25, you don't need anything additional. I'm surprised by that.
The projection we gave was just based on the current folks that we have moving forward. So it wasn't adding, that was just a model.
A
to
level
show.
services, but we're not
Yes.
gonna get any more students, right? So it's like presumably, like, I just don't get how we needed $5 million to go from year 1 to year 2, and then to go from year 3 to year 4, like, we don't need it, like, I'm just surprised by that.
We didn't model out, project out for this particular meeting. I didn't think that was the charge, but to model out the need. I guess I want to make sure I understand the question, so we.
Well, well,
Yeah.
I know, and again,
Yeah.
this is baseline, right?
Yeah.
So to get from this year to next year,
Mhm.
you're saying, revenue, like, we need about the same amount of money. And again, you want, ideally, you want 4.5 million more to get back everything you've cut along the way. But I'm just surprised that there's just been this increase in cost of it just costs more money, and then this year baseline is the same. I'm not getting that. I don't understand why it's not another increase, because that's what we've seen year over year of just to do the same level of service that we're currently doing next year. You're telling me it's gonna cost the same amount of money, is what the chart said.
Oh,
Am I reading that right? Because it was 81,139 this year, 81,171 next year.
oh,
Well,
So that's what I'm confused about. Like, what am I missing? Because I know that the situation is more dire than that, and that's not what these numbers are saying.
I think if you focus on the appropriation from the town, that's the budget number that the school committee votes. Those additional numbers represent revenue that we use towards additional expenses beyond that budget, like grant positions, some positions that are grant funded and whatnot. So that's why you're seeing a little bit, the difference between the two budgets from FY '23 to FY '24 are the 71,989 from FY '23 was 70,220,000. And then if you look at FY '25, it's projected at 73,789. So it is still, the differences are in the revenue pieces that are contributing to those things that we pay for outside of the budget that the school committee appropriates.
Got it. I'm just surprised that the total pool stays the same.
Yeah.
I'm surprised by that.
Again, it's partly because of where the revenue is, where the dollars are coming from and the decrease. If we level funded the revenue from FY '24 to FY '25, you'd see an increase of $83 million, up to $83 million. So you would see that increase again of 2 million plus.
Got it. Okay. And then maybe I was just confused by the language, because I thought you were saying to get the same level of services, it would cost us about 81 million.
Yeah, and the way this is presented is different than you've seen it in the past. You haven't seen the bottom half of these tables, grants and
Correct.
revenue.
Yeah, we only focus on the top
You've only
line.
seen the school committee allocation. What we wanted to try to, or I wanted to try to represent was, what are we really spending?
Which I think is important, because that's ultimately the money that you need, and if you don't get it from,
One place, we need to
gotta
get
get
it
it
from
from the
somewhere
other.
else. Correct,
yeah, I'm just surprised, again, okay. I understand. Thank you.
okay.
Thank you, Natalie. Dave?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Lucas and Bob, thank you very much for putting this information together. This is fantastic. And Jamie, thank you as well for the information you presented. The question that came to my mind, and it seemed like you kind of answered that through later on, was taking a look at that difference in the per pupil expenditure of what we're doing versus the state average. And you mentioned that there's a roughly $20 million difference. And the first thing that came to my mind was, what's the real world cost to our students in that $20 million deficit? But then towards the end of the presentation, please correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of answered that in terms of the positions that have been cut over the last 20 years that haven't been reinstated. and where we aspire to be for things that we've recently cut to be reinstated, as well as new initiatives that would come from the things we've cut over the past 20 years. So is that a correct way to interpret that this is kind of the real world cost of that 20 million difference?
Yes.
Yeah, one of the things we thought about doing, but thought it better to hold off, was to take a look at what's the cost to students and to the educational system if we don't do all the things that we put as we aspire to. So that we could kind of, not so much quantify it, but give you some concept of what the return on investment might be if we were to include those items in the budget or not. And then ultimately, what's the impact on student learning?
Yeah, absolutely. That absolutely makes sense. And so you put together quite a comprehensive list from 2003 to the present. So thank you for that. Have any of these positions in the past 20 years that have been cut been reinstated throughout any of that time, or do we have? Can we say?
I would have to go back and look to see over time. I know when you think about classroom positions, certainly, if it's, but I would have to really take a look at some of the positions that we have cut to see what's come back. But I think we've been on track to try to meet the number we've been able, as a district, what's been voted, what's been afforded to try to move forward, and it's resulted in cuts along the way. And we're building this. I think you hit, Mr. Mercer, you talked about building out. What does this look like out over 5 years? We're not interested in performance or shock or anything like that, but tried to put, where are we at this point? What have we quantified and what have we looked at, and tried to build as part of the bigger conversation on where we are. So I don't have the direct answer on which things have been brought back.
Okay. But based on the aspirational slide of this, am I correct in assuming that probably most things haven't been reinstated? And I understand it's more nuanced than that, because the population's changed and there's different needs, but is that a correct assumption that overall most things probably haven't been reinstated?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, because I notice on here there's a lot of educator positions, a lot of curriculum positions, a lot of extra support positions, and those have direct impacts on just the educational experience that we're providing. It's like across the board, as well as educational outcomes both throughout a student's time in Franklin as well as afterwards, right? And that's really what we're looking at here. That's been cut.
Correct, and I think that's where, when we looked at, if you recall from the presentations in the past, we purposely didn't add slides because we tried to keep this to like 10, just for the purposes of tonight. But we talked about a student. We put up some student profiles and the types of students and what types of adults interact with those students and educate them. So it's a classroom teacher, it could be a special education teacher, it could be a multilingual teacher, after school, it could be a coach, it could be an instructional coordinator who's leading that team. So we tried to encompass in a few of those examples. If you recall, it was like an elementary, a middle school student, a high school student, to try to look at and describe some of the folks that are involved. And I think that is where, over time, we've tried to preserve positions and add pieces that we see having value. You may recall last year from the school committee meeting when we added intervention at the elementary level to help our students who are struggling with math, for example. Our math specialists look at the data and then determine where kids are, and if we can provide some intervention in the moment and a specific key concept, we can bring those kids right back into class and work within the teacher. So that's an example. That's an investment and that's a cost. But at the end of the day, it's keeping students current. We're trying to close the gap from COVID and from when we had students learning remotely for a period of time to try to close those skill gaps. But that's a very specific example. We would love to continue that moving forward and look to expand that even to the middle level. When we look at our writing and literacy, the skills our students need, it's not enough, it can't fall on the backs of just teachers. You need folks who are coordinating and training and working to identify and intervening with kids on a variety of levels to make sure that they're making the progress and closing the gaps on some of those pieces. So those are examples of, they don't show up when you look at like a classroom and you have 21 kids in the class. Those are the positions you don't think of, but you think about when you're looking at enrollment and building classes and building a schedule for a school.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And to kind of follow up on that point, last night at our school committee meeting, we had a discussion around ECDC, and we had what I thought was a very informative and productive discussion on how early intervention, the early intervention services that we provide and the support service we provide at ECDC actually reap benefits later on down the line by allowing a student to get the support they need earlier on to then again not have as high needs later on as they progress through Franklin Public School System. That could be cost effective in terms of the social emotional supports that they might not otherwise need, or particularly if it comes to special education services, not having to go out of district in order to receive those services if we're able to provide those supports earlier on. So kind of to what you were just saying, and to that point as an example, is it accurate to say that some of the things that we're not reinstating and not investing in have both a student development cost, but also a true monetary cost because they are investments?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Councilor Chandler.
Quickly, through you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't have said it better. You had all my points. I think as counselors, maybe we get certain emails that these other groups don't get. But quickly, one, Franklin, thank you for showing up. We appreciate that, and we know you're watching. And I'm sure you have Lucas's back. Thank you. Lastly, just to get a sense of things, as Jamie said, Assistant Superintendent Ms. Rogers stated that for new students, we do an appropriate screening process and we receive records that we will decide additional staff. All right, so we talked about that $104 hopefully being enough, but I mean, with the language barrier, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say no records, how are you actually figuring out, are we just winging it and we're probably gonna go over? I'm just being honest, like, are we gonna, because we're down 270 already in new growth, so you're gonna need more money.
Yes.
Yes. I think everyone's
Ask
gonna agree
any
on that.
department that, I think.
If there was ever a,
You heard that? Did we get that on
if there was
record?
ever a softball thrown,
Yeah.
that was it.
That was T-ball.
That was key.
Yes,
But it is hard to figure out what you will need, is what I'm getting.
right, but I just want to speak to, we certainly don't wing it. We have systems in place. We've been screening students who enter our district for a very long time. And I mean, I've been around for 20 years, and we've been screening kids effectively to determine what they need and placing them with the appropriate folks. The key of this is having the people you need to provide the level of service you need for all the students that we have within the district. So that's a continued challenge we face every year, and will continue to. But I do think, yes, we will need to. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All set quick.
Just a pet peeve of mine, every school presentation I've seen over the last 10 years always references the state average. Right? Is there a way to average districts that look like us? I mean, in that state average is Provincetown. I think they spend $41,000 a student, and Gosnold of Mount Washington, out in the hinterlands, that spends $12. Is there a way to, or have we looked at that?
Yes, sir.
That would make more sense to me.
Okay, we can share that with you. We have it in our, the FinCom presentation and in the school committee presentation. We put the Hockomock League as local districts that are within our area as an example.
You got Needhams and Welsleys and
Not-
whatnot, well.
Yeah, but I understand your point, Mr. Conley. We have the Hockomock League, but certainly if there's, in the future, for future presentations, it's particularly maybe next FinCom or whatever, whenever we need to, we can look to grab some comparable districts. There's an analysis done through the
Similar
state.
sized students and that
There's
kind of stuff.
DART districts, they're called. Oftentimes, they look at demographics and size, and they try to compare districts. And I know that's been presented in different ways, but I'll be sure to key in on that when we present that, so that we're looking at the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
Just so we're looking at similar size,
Sure.
similar student size.
Yep, and we have that, and I think,
populations, so.
if you look at the FinCom presentation from last year, you'll see the Hockomock schools as an example, just to start that conversation.
I must have missed it.
It's okay.
You there?
Maybe.
Thanks, George. Anybody else on the committee before I go to the audience? Dave?
Just to thank you all so much for all the presentations in front of us. So just to kind of make sure I'm understanding everything, kind of just big picture with looking at like that 5-year forecast. So I know when we first met, we were already kind of looking at the red, at about like 220K, deficit, just with a 2.5% increase. As we, kind of kicked off some cheery news about new growth, some more deficits there, and Jamie, I'm a big fan of Talk Franklin. It's that and Taylor Swift as I drive into work. And in one of the meetings, they kind of put a price tag of, the hotel tax, the loss of that, if it comes around, and hopefully that's still coming, but potentially, maybe like $200,000.
Yeah.
So there's a chance that just looking towards, next year, which originally on August 2nd was looking not too terrible.
Right.
Back of the envelope math, that could be a deficit of like almost like 300, about $700,000.
Mhm.
So again, Superintendent Jaguar, I really appreciate, everything that we kind of have here, and just kind of looking at, a 2.5% increase, where would that look? But even that 2.5% might not be realistic, right? If we're looking at $750,000 deficit, the schools being about, 55% of the total operating budget, it's likely to assume we're going to be taking hits from that deficit. Is that?
Jamie?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would, your back of the napkin math is pretty good, Dave. I mean, I think where you're going, I'm seeing heads bob that are familiar with the budget from finance committee members. That's an accurate statement. What I wouldn't want to do is prescribe. I mean, we're still 6 to 8 months away from that, so I wouldn't want to necessarily say that there would be any reductions. I mean, I think that's what the budget development process is for, is to kind of weed out, anything that we may not need. And I think the superintendent, the school committee, and the council and myself are trying to trim little things now through the budget process. The department heads know. I say, if you don't need it, don't spend it. Don't think you just have a free way to go here. You really have to justify, the expenditures of whatever contract you're doing, or even small things. Particularly with facilities and DPWs, probably the bigger concerns of mine, because as we know, those are the big cost drivers. My bigger concern is, I mean, that's a concern, but I feel like through health insurance negotiations, maybe some other ways, we can find ways creatively through the years. The school administration and the town administration and finance teams and HR teams are meeting on a bi-weekly basis, improving communication to try to work these things out, and I would hope to believe that we can creatively come up with some ways to ensure that the model that was up there in August, is something that we can really hang our hat on. My bigger concern is the overwhelming wish list of things that people want in addition to what we're talking about. Level service for the schools does not include a Remington Jefferson remodel. It does not include money for Parmenter to fix Parmenter. It does not include any other strategic facilities requests. It does not include a police station. It does not include any other net zero goals, any other climate change activity, anything else that people want. I say this over and over again because people in the community have a lot of great ideas, and they have a lot of spirit, and they're communicating that through our elected representatives, which is exactly what they should do. But I have to be that guy, or the skunk at the party, to just caution everybody that we are not building bleachers at the high school next month. We're not redoing RJ next year. This stuff is when you don't stay on top of these things, they are going to get more and more costly, as I think everybody knows. And so while level service is there, and I appreciate all of the data that was thrown up, I just need to make sure, my bigger concern is about managing the expectations of the public about what they want to see out of us is a financial price tag that is probably never going to amount to anything anytime soon. If we were to plug in debt service numbers like I did in that presentation, people saw the deficits that I'd put in there in FY 26, 27, 28, and forward on, right? So while FY 25, Dave, could be, of a concern based on what you just said, and you're 100% right with the back of napkin math, I'd hope there'd be some creativity between now and then, and we can hopefully get through that. The bigger issue is really looking down the road. How is the town going to finance all of these capital improvements, curriculum improvements, right? Vans, ovens. I mean, I could just go on and on about the infrastructure that we have baked in, and I think there's got to be some hard conversations in the community about where those priorities lie. Is there any areas of fat that could be cut off? And whether or not we have to make some systemically challenging decisions. This also does not include, as I articulated in the last presentation, August, collective bargaining is up in a year. So we're back at the table with all of our major unions in a year. So, after FY 25, I should say. Looking down the road a little further is bigger cause for concern about those big projects.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you, Dave. We're getting a little short of time, only because of our delay in the middle. Is there anyone in council chambers that has a question? Name and address, please.
My name is Maxwell Marangelo. Of course, this time I'm too tall.
We'll mark that down, Max. We'll mark that down.
My name is Maxwell Marangelo. I live at 127 Central Park Terrace. I just wanted to respond to some of one of the questions earlier about comparing the towns per pupil, the per pupil expenditure based on comparable towns. I actually did an analysis with Franklin Matters, and one of the smaller points on that interview was the factors that affect per pupil spending. One of them that I mentioned was the fact that as a town, we have a higher percentage of our population that are school-age children. So as a percentage of a tax base, we have to spread that money out over more kids, and that's stressing our school system. Because you have the same amount of people, but you have more kids. So that's one problem. The other thing in terms of comparable towns that I found differs in between the towns is, of course, the amount of income, per capita income that the town has. Wealthier towns are going to spend more on their kids, as well as their equalized value, is that? Equalized value per capita. Places with more property and more property values also spend more on their kids. If you account for those three things, you could predict 70% of the variance of per pupil spending, of what the town spends per pupil. The other thing I just want to throw in there is that also my analysis showed that about 4%, if you control for the amount of per pupil per capita income in the town, you can do a very good job of predicting each town's tax rate. So if you control for that, all the towns you can compare across towns. And if you do that, you can find our tax rate compared to other towns after you control for per capita income is about 4% lower than average. So I think if you want to just be average, a good target would be 4%. 4% if you wanted to bring us up to average. So I invite you all to check out Franklin Matters and see my podcast on there. And I'm happy to share that documents with you. There's also some handy calculators on the spreadsheet. If you actually download the spreadsheet and open it in Excel and edit it, there's actually, you could plug in, maybe we have less kids, or maybe a higher population, or maybe our income's different. And you can play around with it and it'll actually change the numbers. So I invite you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. I see a couple of hands up on Zoom. Heather?
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I have to interject for Heather. I'm sorry, Heather.
Oh, it was going to be quick.
It's an open meeting law issue. I'm very sorry. You'll have plenty of time, but you can't actually ask any questions here because she's the fifth member of the Finance Committee. So you'd have to post the meeting.
Oh.
So Heather can't, yep, it's part of the learning curve of government, Heather. I'm sure you can email me the question, on the side, or wait for the finance committee. I just didn't want that to be your opening time on the finance.
Sorry about that, Heather.
So, but we have counselors in the,
There's a few counselors sitting out in the council chambers as well that
So
can't
I
ask
can't
any
ask
questions.
questions anymore? I can't wait to learn about this.
I know, that's why you,
It's interesting. There was
All
another.
right, thank you.
yep,
Yep. There was another hand up.
Selena.
Selena.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Super. I'm Selena Cousin, 114 Beach Street. Thank you so much for all the information you put together. It looks like a lot of work on Jamie and Lucas's workload, and I really appreciate all the time that you must have put into that, and the business manager too. Sorry, I forget your name, but thank you. One thing I wanted to point out, as a parent of a high schooler and a junior high, middle schooler, soon to be high schooler, one of the ways of sort of comparing our schools and what's been happening over the course of the past few years, I'm looking at the U.S. News and World Report's rankings of public high schools in Massachusetts. And even if we only go back 5 years, we've fallen 20 points, meaning from like 2019 to 2023, we've gone from being ranked the 69th best public high school in Massachusetts. We're now at the 88th best public high school in Massachusetts. And I just fear, it's probably less predictable, but I assume those numbers will continue to drop over the next 5 years in a similar fashion if we don't make big changes. And when we look at, we mentioned the Hockomock area and the towns that are near us. Currently, towns that have high schools, public high schools ranking better than Franklin include surrounding towns of Rentham, Norfolk, Plainville, for King Philip, Millis, Medway, Medfield, Hopkinton, Holliston, Hopedale, North Attleboro, Mansfield, Foxborough, Mendon, Upton, which is Nipmuc, Ashland, and Westwood. The only abutting towns I found that were ranked worse than our Franklin High School were Milford and Bellingham. And I think we have to keep that kind of data in our heads. It might not be the financial data that we can actually, predict with specifics and financial, how it affects us financially, but it's going to affect where kids get accepted to colleges. It's going to affect our housing rates. It's going to affect, how many parents say enough is enough and I'm going to a private high school. And so I just wanted to make sure that we're sort of seeing that part of the picture too, especially when I see those, what if we don't do anything for the next 5 years? And when we start to talk like that, I get really concerned about the future of our high school graduates. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. Okay. Please. Just name and address, please, Ruth Ann.
Hi, everyone. Ruth Ann O'Sullivan from 175 Oak Street. I just want to be really quick, and I just want to, because it was brought up a couple times tonight about the migrant situation, and I just want to caution everybody, because I think that the community who may not be as plugged into what's been happening since, Dr. Bergen was chair, and for years, the school's been concerned about the budget. I don't want the public to be sort of scapegoating the migrant kids. And I don't think that's your intention at all. I just think it's something that we need to worry about, because the funding coming from the state, we need to make sure is coming and whatnot. But I just ask for kind of grace around that topic, I guess, is like, just so that it doesn't get perceived by the public, because I don't want people rising up against the Tri-County vote. I don't want people rising up against the migrants because they think that it's somehow impacting the school budget. So these things are important. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we are running out of time here. I will say, as we look forward to our next meeting, again, we have an election coming up, so there'll be new people. It'll take a little bit to get them maybe on board. I think I would look to maybe January sometime in January, having another joint budget subcommittee meeting where we'll be a little further ahead, have some more information, and I promise everyone that I will schedule it on a night that there is not another meeting following it, so that we have plenty of time and we're not up against the clock to maybe not get everybody's question answers. Although everybody who raised their hand, and everybody on the committee and everybody in Zoom, we did get to. But I think allowing more time would be helpful. And I know it's a hindrance on our administrative people for coming out an additional night. But I think it's such an important part of what we need to be looking at moving forward, that we need to take that time and spend it. I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. Thank the committee people. Thank One Franklin. I know you're up and running. You're doing a great job, and I hope that these joint budget subcommittee meetings helps One Franklin to help get the message to the community so that they understand what the needs are. And that's our plan as we move forward. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Non-debatable. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Aye.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
You're gonna do a roll call vote, online.
Yes.
Yeah.